Hi, I'm Elise Peterson, and my project was making an electric drum kit using an Arduino and an Arduino shield. So my plan was in week 1 I was going to solder LEDs because I needed to use soldering later on in my project. So I was going to apply what I learned in week 1 into week 2 when I was going to solder and build a circuit for my Arduino shield, which did not come assembled. In week 3 I was going to build drum pads and attach pieces. And I was also going to use soldering in week 3 to attach longer cords to my pieces to connect into my Arduino shield. And then in week 4 I was going to work on the code. So my plan did change, but week 1 stayed the same, so I did solder LEDs, and I used my knowledge of soldering in week 2 still, but I did not use it to solder and build the circuit for my Arduino shield because my Arduino shield came assembled, which I was not expecting it was going to be assembled, so I was very thankful that I might have clicked the wrong thing, but I was happy because that would have been a lot of soldering. So in week 3 I actually started to build drum pads, and I attached my pieces, and then I soldered cords to my pieces to make it a longer connection so that I could attach it into my Arduino shield. And on week 4 I worked on my code. So this is my Arduino shield, and you can see on the left that is a MIDI, which is a musical instrument digital interface, which that just connects and it will control sound. And then in the middle you can see that there's an FTD, which means Future Technology Devices International, which that's a brand, but it's just a different type of USB. So the sources that I used Instructables for my LED soldering, which was very good and it was very detailed, and I highly recommend Instructables because it was much more clear than the second site that I used, which was Spikenzielabs. So I used Spikenzielabs for the bulk of my project because that was the site where I got the Arduino shield, and it was very good at explaining how to build the drum pads, and it gave helpful tips on which type of foam that you need to use. You need to use the ones with more air so that it has more give in it, so that you do not destroy a piezo as you're playing. It was very good at that, but when it came to actually connecting your Arduino and your Arduino shield and doing the code, it was not very clear. So I don't really recommend Spikenzielabs because their equipment is good, but their explanation is not always the best. So this is what I did with using my Instructables website. I poked holes in cardboard, and then I placed that paper over it so that I would know which part of the LED goes where. So I'd put an LED in the spot, and then I'd put the positive leg on the red, and then a negative leg on the blue. And then you would solder all of the legs together, as you can see as I did on the right. And when I tested to see if my connections were correct, I would use a battery, and then I would connect a positive and negative leg to see if the LED would light up. This is what I did for week 2. I cut out 10 circles, and I glued the pieces on them using epoxy, and then I also cut out the foam for the base of my drum pad. And in week 3 I soldered the cords of the pieces to make it longer, so that I would be able to glue it on to connect it to my Arduino shield. And this took a lot longer than I was expecting because, as you can see on the left, the solders that Spikenzielabs, the pieces came with, it was very pretty soldering, but it was not very sturdy soldering. So if I were to move it just any little bit, then the soldering would come apart. So then I would have to solder. I had to solder over that again, which was difficult, and I just ended up making very big bulky solders because they kept coming undone because I hadn't originally soldered. So it was hard to solder on top of that solder. And Spikenzielabs they recommended using a lead solder, which lead solders are not they're not used anymore because there's harmful things in the lead. But we did have some lead soldering still back in the back. And so I tried to use that because that's what they had recommended, but it did not work, and the metal and the lead in the soldering would just kind of fall off. So that was also a learning process, and I learned that I needed to glue down where I had soldered or tape down where I had soldered so that the solders do not come undone again. And this is just how I soldered, and that one of my solders is down in the middle. And I used these clips to solder it, and it was kind of a difficult solder because these are pretty small cords that you are connecting to a larger cord, a larger wire. And yeah, it was hard because you didn't want to set it down on the metal so that it wouldn't get stuck to the metal, so you had to lift it up and have it be freestanding. And I also use copper wire because copper is a very good conductor of electricity. And this is how I tested to see if my connections were good and my solders were good. So I would tap the piezo, which is on the right, just with my finger because the piezo reacts to pressure. And then I would look on my Arduino shield, and the play should light up and it should blink. But by the time I was ready to record it, it did not light up anymore because I think when I was trying to connect my Arduino shield to my Arduino, I must have short-circuited my Arduino shield. After I had made all of my solders, and I thought they were good, then I ended up gluing my pad to a base so that they wouldn't just be freestanding pads, which that would be kind of cool, but the solders would break. I don't know how there would be any way that they wouldn't break. So that's why I glued them down to this board so that the solders would not break anymore. Even with my extra gluing and duct tape, I don't think that would hold them down. So this is what I did during my third week still. I connected on the FTDI, which is the prongs that you see kind of in the middle of the Arduino shield, and that means Future Technology Devices International, and that's just a different type of USB. And I had to connect according to the colors on this front picture on the right. I had to connect, so like I had to connect the black cord to the ground pin, and I had to do the same for the rest of them. So that's what you see on the right is me trying to figure out which way is the correct way to wire. And then that is when I short-circuited my Arduino shield. But if I wouldn't have short-circuited my Arduino shield, then this is the code that I would have done. So as you see, it says pad note, which I have four drum pads. So that's why I have 4 there. And then I have the unsigned, which is what the MIDI does. So the MIDI that will controls the sound. So 60 to 75. So 60 being the highest and 75 being the lowest note. So I have 4 different ones because I have 4 different drum pads, and each one goes up in an increasing 5 degrees. My pad cutoff, that is how much force I have to put on one drum pad for it to react. In my playtime, so this is like it would be hard to roll on my piso because my piso was not a very wasn't a very high tech piso, so I would not be able to roll very well on my electric drum kit because my piso would not be able to react in enough time. So 40 is the least amount of time that I would have to be able to hit it. So if I were rolling, then there would be a little skip, and everything wouldn't be a continual sound because there has to be at least a 40-degree break. And this is when I found out that my light stopped working because I had left my Arduino and my Arduino Shield plugged into the FTDI, and then the next morning I came to check it, just using the barrel, and that it would light up anyway just using the barrel because I would be plugging it in to an outlet, and it did not light up at all. So that's when I knew that I had done some wiring wrong on my Arduino Shield. It was very upsetting because I had gotten very far, and I was like, well, I cannot mess up now. Everything good. But then I did mess up, and everything was not so great. But I learned a lot, so it's okay. My reflection, I learned how to solder. I had never soldered before, so it was good, and I feel like I got a lot better at soldering after I had to resolder and resolder and resolder the pisos to the extension wires. But my time management, I did work on it like every day and focused on it every day, but I feel like I should have done more of the build part at home and more of the code part at school because it's kind of hard to do a build project. It's kind of hard to do the build part of your project at school because you do not have very much time at school. And then if you do the build part at school and you need extra time, then you have to take it back home, and then things can get broken as you're transporting it home. And that's what happened a lot with my solders when I was connecting it to the piso and the extension wire. Problem solving, I did problem solve when my solders kept breaking. Then I decided that I need to glue them down or tape them down so that it would prevent it from moving, the solders from moving, and hopefully that the solders would not break again. Overall, I think this was a good project because I learned a lot about soldering. I had never soldered at all, like ever. So I got pretty good at soldering after having to redo it so many times, and I knew that a MIDI, I knew that it had something to do with musical things, but I did not know that the MIDI was the thing that would control the sound, so I learned about that. And I also learned about an FTDI, which I honestly did not have any idea what it was, but I did learn that it was a type of USB.